Okay, now this is a book review I've been very excited to hop into. So, in this one, we're going to cover some miscellaneous books that I've kind of hopped into during and after Christmas. A lot of them were Christmas gifts gifted to me by friends and family members. And so, one of them is actually a really new release of a prominent series that everybody will know, but I'll save that one for the end. But without further ado, I'll go and hop into the first one. So this one is called Alien's Bishop. Now, those that know me very well, I'm a huge Alien fan. I've seen all the movies, the originals from the 70s with Sigourney Weaver in them. I've seen the new series with, what's his name, Michael Fassbender. And all the way up to the one that was most recently released, Alien Romulus, which was a phenomenal movie. Good that they got back to kind of sort of the original formula of what the original movies were all about. Not to mention how terrifying that alien variant at the end was. Those that know. So if you remember from the second movie, there was an android character named Bishop, who was kind of I would say he was the main companion to Sigourney Weaver, and was a very vital member of the Marines team that they were all kind of with, the Colonial Marines. And he was a character that really came into clutch several times. So really and truly, this novel is, at least at the moment from what I'm aware, its own standalone thing. However, it does take place after the events of the second movie, Aliens. So if you remember what happened to the character of Bishop at the end of the movie, where he basically got torn in half and was basically a remnant of the android that he used to be. So, of course, being a machine, his mind can be transferred into a different body. And so that's where you meet this new Bishop character, who's basically a copy of the mind of the Bishop from the movie. This is very convoluted, I know. Bear with me, stay with me here. He basically, from his point of view, awakens in this new place, and he is with his creator, a man named Michael Bishop, who the design of the android Bishop, the likeness thereof, is based off of, which is a little detail that you learn in the original movies. But here you have the return of the character Michael Bishop in this book, and the character Bishop. It's a story where they are trying to further their knowledge of the xenomorph. But even as the reader, you can kind of sort of predict how certain things are going to go, especially if you've seen the movies and certain hints they drop here and there in the book about the character Michael Bishop. You're like, I'm not so sure I can trust this guy. I don't really know. But there's a couple of other storylines taking place at the same time in this book as well, following a group of Colonial Marines and others. A theme that I've started to notice, one that was slightly explored in Alien Isolation, heavily explored in other similar series to this, where you're in the future and you have androids and synthetics, as they're called in a lot. But it really explores the question of what is a real human being and what isn't. What does it mean to be alive? And where do synthetic people fall into that definition? Can they really be considered a living being? Like, yes, they're sentient. They can have thoughts and in some cases even have feelings according to their coding. But really, aside from flesh or wires, what makes them so different from us? And so it really just explores that whole topic of conversation. But of course, you have a lot of the same horrific visages of the face huggers, the xenomorph, the process of that, and everything else. And I will say the ending takes a very fascinating turn. Like, I would recommend this book for anybody that likes that kind of science-y exploration sort of thing. And, not just with that, but also the quite a few different references that it makes towards the movie series, which I did appreciate, and was honestly shocked at how many I could remember or notice. So with that, I'm going to hop into the next book. Now, this started out, I was walking through Walmart one day, and I just happened to notice this book. I knew it had been written, and I had not long ago finished the books about Aragon, the inheritance cycle, I think is what it was called. The Aragon, Eldest, Brisinger, and Inheritance. So to my knowledge, there's been 2 books written since the completion of that series. There's The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, which I still have yet to read, which is supposed to be like a collection of stories from the country that the story takes place in. But there's also this book that was written after the fact, which is a bit of a standalone story, but also a bit of what happens after the end of book 4. And it follows a totally different character from his point of view versus the original main character, Aragorn. So this book is called Murtagh, which, if I remember correctly, he was Aragorn's half-brother. He was also one of the main adversaries to Aragorn, but there's a lot of details to go along with that that's covered in my video about the main series. But I saw this particular cover style in Walmart and I was like, oh my gosh, I know I have a Kindle, but I must have this book. It is absolutely gorgeous. So I'll start with the back side of it. I just love that red foiling combined with the black color. That's one of my favorite color combinations. You know, just the intricacy of all the designs, and there's Murtagh's sword portrayed on the pages. Love it when they paint the edges of the pages and books. Such a nice detail. But here's a close-up of the front cover here, where you have Murtagh and Thorn, his dragon, portrayed. Like I said, this story follows the after effects of everything that took place in the main series, and you really come to explore everything that Murtagh and Thorn went through while under the control of Galbatorix, the evil king from the original series. And you really get a sense of the level of trauma and torture that they went through while they were under his servitude, because they were quite literally forced into the service of Galbatorix. And so they essentially placed themselves in a self-imposed exile in order to process through all their feelings and everything that happened to them. And to be honest, their public perception still isn't the best, because the truth never fully came out outside of the main group of heroes. So the general public still, for all intents and purposes, think that they're the bad guys. And so they're just doing their best to avoid being noticed. And they're just trying to live out at least a portion of their lives alone to deal with things. But it's really fascinating, again, the way Christopher writes his books and the magic that takes place within his books, as far as how detailed the spells and everything have to be in order to be successful and not deadly and backfire on the ones casting it. You really get a sense for that in all the things that Murtagh has to do, because now that the threat of Galbatorix is over, we now have room for a new threat to take his place, and quite possibly something far worse and more powerful and more dark than what originally was thought possible to exist. And so it really becomes a mystery book where he travels from various places that were portrayed in the original series, and even new places that we never got to see, where he's trying to find the answer to this new mystery and these strange happenings that are starting to take place throughout the land. And it really does take an extremely dark turn, especially towards the end, where you finally come to this new location. And what I really got a sense of was, and I looked online later, apparently this author does have plans to write a new series to kind of be a sequel to the main series. But even without that knowledge, I got a feeling by the end of the book, like, oh wow, there is definitely a whole lot more to this than what we still have yet to find out. There's a whole lot more going on, and there's so much more that can be written about what happens towards the end of this book. And then, like I said in my Dark Artifices review, you get this overwhelming sense of doom, that something really bad is starting to take shape and beginning to happen, and will happen in the near future unless something is done about it. But yeah, I would definitely give this book a definite 10 out of 10 worth the read, and definitely worth the extra bit of money just for the beautiful cover that comes along with it. And I just love that saying on the back of the book, you know, by my will, I will make my way. It's really just a callback of him and Thorn refusing to let themselves be controlled again like they were in the main series, which I honestly have to say, knowing what they went through, I can't say I blame them. I could definitely see why they wouldn't want to necessarily align themselves with anybody in particular. But without further ado, I'm going to hop into the other book that was gifted to me. And from what I gather, this is a fairly new series, and this is book 1, and book 2, if I remember correctly, is going to be released around September, November of 2025. But it's not one that I heard of until it was gifted to me, and it is called The Will of the Many. And I didn't know what exactly to expect going into this book. I think if I am to understand it correctly, it carries a lot of maybe Greek or Roman architectural themes into it. Basically, it is a world wherein there exists a hierarchy or this ranking system that has about, and it shows it at the beginning of the book, the different names. There's 8 different levels to this ranking system, and each of them has a different name and a different amount of people that basically support that role of that one person within that role, if that makes sense. So one thing I noticed, if any of you are familiar with Amnesia Rebirth, it had a lot of similar themes, I felt, to that, because in Amnesia Rebirth, you had basically this entire civilization of people having their life force drained in order to support and keep this one individual alive. And so what's similar to that with this book is that for each level in this hierarchy, you have a certain amount of people. They call it seeding, but basically essentially draining or feeding their, they call it will, but I guess you can call it life force to a degree to make it more understandable. But basically they are seeding their will to these higher up positions. And so the will is basically the power source of this civilization. Powers their transport machines, other machines, all these other things in this world. So to give you an example, the lowest rank in this system in Octavus has no one seeding to them. They're the ones that seed to the people above them. And those are the people that are kind of like the dregs of the society. They're constantly tired because they're seeding their will to somebody above them. The next level up, you have Septimus, and 8 people seed to them. And then the next level has 56 people seeding their will to that person, then 336 to the next person. And so the further up in this ranking system, the more power and ability that you have. And you come to learn that the more will that you have, the more abilities you have to manipulate the environment and objects around you. Now, the main character in this series starts at the very bottom, and he has a whole backstory that it explores and everything. But he is basically adopted by someone that's about the mid-level of this ranking system, and he's basically adopted for the sole purpose of accomplishing a goal that this higher ranked individual has. And so at the threat of being tossed into prison into a sapper, as they call them, which is a machine that drains your will. So in the prisons, they have sappers that basically drain all your will, bleed you dry, and that's where you exist until you perish, pretty much. So he's basically got the threat of that over his head as incentive to do whatever this higher ranked person says. And so the quest that he sends him on is to go to an academy. So in this world, you have 3 different governing bodies, a trinity or a trifecta of sorts. You have military, governance, and religion. So the adoptive father of the main character, I believe, comes from the military faction, and he's sending him to the school, which is controlled by the religion faction. And so the big conflict is there's rumors that religion is taking liberties or taking steps separate from the other 2 governing bodies and might possibly be trying to take control of the entire society. And who's to say that the other governing bodies are not trying to do the same? But he gets sent to this academy to try and figure out what religion is up to. And there's a ranking system inside of the academy that mirrors the ranking system in the every day-to-day life of their culture. I will say there is something satisfying about watching a character ascend through the ranks of a hierarchy or ranking system. Like, it's so satisfying when he or she accomplishes that goal and moves on to the next level. And I guess you could say it kind of mirrors a lot of how we go through our lives and how we try to ascend through the ranks of a military organization or within our job. Yeah, that's just a very satisfying aspect to it. But as the story progresses, you start to realize just how much more is going on in the background. There's also a group of people that's in opposition to this culture that's causing a bunch of trouble at the same time, and the main character just finds himself caught in the middle of it. He's got all these different groups trying to influence him to their own ends, and it's really stressful to read about, like all the crap that he is having to go through just to survive, while also accomplish as many goals as possible. And another thing I'm starting to notice in quite a lot of books I've read lately is the incorporation of a maze of some sort, which I always find satisfying for whatever reason the case may be, whether it's in Goblet of Fire, The Maze Runner, or this book. Like, I don't know why that's always been such a fascinating concept to me, but yeah, a lot of that, it's a heavy theme in this book. But what I will say for the end of it is that it leaves you with far more questions than answers. Maybe some of the answers are answered by the end of the book, but it generally keeps you in a large level of mystery throughout the entire thing. And by the end of it, I was like, oh my God, what happened? What is going on? What is happening? I don't understand fully, only to a degree. But it really takes a crazy turn at the very end, where you start to realize, but not fully realize, everything that has fully happened, and like it just gets absolutely insane. And that might be because it took me a while to get through it. Like, it was a little slow in some areas, but that ending alone might be worth it enough for me to purchase the sequel coming out this year, which I believe is called The Strength of the Few, just to see what happens next. Like, say what you want about the content of the book, it'll definitely keep you engaged. So yeah, I'll definitely recommend that one for sure. So now we're going to hop into the fourth and final book of this review, and I've been very excited to hop into this one. And it was released, I think, by the time of the filming of this video, a couple of months ago, and that is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. So there's a close-up of the cover right there, and I'll even give you a close-up of the book cover here. And this is one thing I appreciate about the hardcover books of her series, that they follow the same theme or aesthetic, so they all look relatively the same with their own unique design. So of course you have a snake and a mockingjay represented on this book, just like you did with The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is one of those books where I've read the original trilogy and I've read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I knew relatively what this book was about going into it. It really treads a line. Like, I really don't know what is worse, being somebody totally blind to what happens in this book, or reading the original trilogy and knowing the outcome of this book. Like, I don't know what's a worse feeling. Like, just there again, the overall sense of dread and doom of what is to come. Like, you just know in your heart that it's going to go a certain way no matter what, and it's not good for the character. Like, it's amazing. It's an amazing book, but yeah, it doesn't go well for the character, let's just say. If you remember, the main trilogy takes place with Katniss Everdeen during the 74th and 75th Hunger Games. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was basically a villain origin story of Coriolanus Snow involving a character named Lucy Gray Baird, and it takes place during the 10th Hunger Games. Now, this book in particular takes place during the 50th Hunger Games, which is the second Quarter Quell. And if you remember from the books and movies, the Quarter Quells are every 25 years and marked with special significance and twists to the arena to follow a certain theme. Now, most of you might know that the 50th Hunger Games was Haymitch Abernathy's Hunger Games. And he's a character you meet in the main trilogy that a lot of the characters had a great aversion to. Like, he's just this dreadful, brash, abrasive alcoholic that no one really immediately takes a liking to, but he is a mentor to Katniss and Peeta in the main trilogy. Now, it's been a very long time since I've read the books, but I do remember fairly well how the movies portrayed him, and I feel like they may have fleshed his character out a little bit more in the movies and made him slightly more likable and supportive to Katniss in all her situations. But what I can say about this book is that it really brings you closer to the character of Haymitch, and you really come to appreciate his character, I'll say. And I gotta say, by the end of this book, you definitely understand why he became an alcoholic and why he behaved the way he did in such a negative way towards some of the other characters. And like you just really understand the reason and the reasoning, because there was reasoning behind why he behaved the way that he did in the main series. And honestly, like if I went through what he did, I probably would have went down the same path. But also in this book are not just references to the main series, but a lot of cameos and references to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Because Haymitch is actually romantically involved with a descendant of the Covey, who I think that's the proper pronunciation, that make an appearance in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And it's actually in this book. This is the one thing I'll spoil because I found it fascinating. You find out that Katniss Everdeen is in some way distantly or closely related bloodline-wise to the Covey. So we have a lot of overarching themes throughout all 5 of these books that are related to song and mockingjays, songbirds in general, and snakes. And like it's really fascinating how she ties all this together in her writing. So the story is Haymitch goes into the 50th Hunger Games. Now, it being the second quarter quell, the significance of these games, which you learn in the trilogy, is that instead of 24 tributes, you now have 48 tributes going into the arena. So double the amount of tributes. That's 4 people from each district. 4 children from each district being sent into this arena to die. Now, this taking place 40 years after the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, there's been some advancements, however minimal, as far as the treatment of the tributes. So instead of the teeny tiny arena that they were in the last time and being thrown into a zoo, they're at least shoved into this apartment complex. But she really emphasizes how the cameras are utilized in this particular book, as far as like how emotionless to their situation all the camera people are, and how like, oh, like we know you've just went through this horrible thing, but we got to get this shot. Like, can you give us a smile? Like, oh, I know your kid just died, but can you give us a smile real quick, or give us a shocked face, give us some tears? You know, like the dehumanization that the Capitol does to the districts is really emphasized in this book. Like the Capitol people really and truly view the district people as animals, like very reminiscent of the Nazi dehumanization of the Jewish people. And there's not really a training center yet like you had with Katniss. It's just a gymnasium where they had stations to practice. And you really get another sense of how, with some of the characters that pop up there, just how evil and cruel President Snow is with how he punishes people. But the actual arena itself was heavily riddled with mutts, the genetically modified monsters of the Capitol. But another twist, as we learn with the main series, is that everything in the arena is poisonous. The water, the plant life, the food, all of it. And so they really have to get creative when it comes to getting clean things to eat or drink. But I won't spoil anything else that happens in the arena itself, because there's a lot of twists and turns with that. Some things that took place that I never really expected the character of Haymitch to be involved in. But like I said, I'll prepare you now. The end of the story during the time period of the 50th Hunger Games is not a happy ending. It's in the chapters after that, where you really develop that appreciation and understanding of Haymitch and some things that take place between him and Katniss and Peeta. I'll give this book yet another 10 out of 10, and I couldn't help but think, like, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes book came out in 2020. The movie came out in 2023, so we'll probably have at least another 3 years before we see a movie made out of this, which I hope there is. But I kept sitting there thinking, reading through this book, I was like, oh my gosh, this will make a crazy movie. So yeah, if we get a movie out of this one, I'll definitely be at the theater to see that one. Really excited to see if we get one of that. But yeah, everybody go pick this book up if you haven't already. Highly recommend. 10 out of 10 for everything that it does for the entire series. So that's all the books that I have. We're now completely caught up. Those were all my Christmas books, if you will. So yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care.